Good morning. Let's begin with a prayer. Our Father, we thank you for the opportunity and the privilege and the responsibility of being here on the first day of the week to worship you, to study more about you, and to allow us the opportunity to encourage each other as we worship and as we study. We'd ask your blessings on those that are mentioned in our sheet for today, especially Patty Miller, Richard Beaton, Carrie, Jeremy Shopper, and others who are specifically mentioned and others that we know of. We'd ask your blessings and care for them. We'd ask your blessings and care for us as we study. Please let us use this as a time to renew and continually look for ways that we can grow closer to you. In Jesus' name, amen. As the privilege of one who gets to teach, you get to decide the subject. And I couldn't decide on one, so I'm going to do three. And we're going to do I want to try something a little bit different. And it's going to be a challenge because time management as well as staying on topic, but I do want to stray and get off on any tangent that you might want to within what I want to allow, since I'm the teacher. I want to do three different subjects, and I want to spend 15 minutes each on these topics. And they're as noted on the screen. I want us to be able to imagine ourselves in the shoes of the Bible people. Their times, their brain, their culture, not watered down or not biased by 2026 and what we have experienced in our life. I'm looking around. I was going to do this. That's usually the case. There are two or three that are pretty young. The rest of us are all normal age. We've had more years and more experience and so on, and that is okay. We need to learn from those who are less experienced. My dad told me a long time ago a real easy lesson outline. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Three things. We're going to talk about tell them what we're going to tell them today, and then we'll get to other things and so on. I have not looked at a whole lot of studies, but I've always heard attention deficits are really prominent now. I personally believe that in 90% of the cases, that is a choice and a lack of discipline, whether you're 3 years old or 80 plus. That's my personal opinion. I'm not going to back that up by studies. However, if we only do 3 15-minute sessions, if you don't like 2 of them, you can fall asleep during 2 of them, but you have to wake up for the other 15-minute sessions that we're going to do. We're going to have some variety. I want this to be a little bit different. I do want us to sit closer to the front. I'm going to say it's really stress-freighting, and I said that on purpose, for a teacher when we're all spread out. And so I have roped that off. Thank you for not taking them down. There will be a 1-minute warning. I've set my phone a 1-minute warning so you can rush to your seat in the last 7 rows if you need that. I did pick the divine number of 7 of rows, so that is scripturally based for me to rope those off. I'm not a numerology person, but I'm going to use it today. One of the things they talk about is Providence that I'm going to be talking about in our series for this first quarter. And in that case, I've had the opportunity and the privilege of kind of getting into this. And when you're teaching, I'm like 4 or 5 months ahead. What do I want to do? On a Wednesday night, and then for our life group, and then for Quads class 2 weeks ago, I got the chance to kind of warm up a little bit on some of these things. And Wednesday night, about 6 or 7 weeks ago, I'm going to read something, and some of you have heard it before, either on that Wednesday night or before. But I think it's quite impressive to me to be able to try to know what we're talking about. I'm almost out of breath because I'm trying to cover a whole lot of stuff. When I want us to be able to imagine being in the shoes of Bible people, if we know Bible people a little better, and if we know the Bible even closer. It becomes more relevant to us. And there's a story many years ago. One of England's leading actors was asked to recite for the pleasure of his fellow guests. He consented and asked if there was anything special that his audience would like to hear. After a moment's pause, an old clergyman present said, "Could you, sir, recite to us the 23rd Psalm?" A strange look passed over the actor's face. He paused for a moment and then said, "I can and I will, upon one condition, and that is that after I have recited it, you, my friend, will do the same." "I," said the clergyman in surprise, "but I am not an elocutionist. However, if you wish, I will do so." Impressively, the great actor began the psalm. His voice and his intonation were perfect. He held his audience spellbound, and as he finished, a great burst of applause broke from the guests. That's a pet peeve, is applause in certain cases where I'm not personally, I shouldn't have paused there. Then as the applause died away, the old clergyman arose and began the psalm. His voice was not remarkable. His intonation was not faultless. When he had finished, no sound of applause broke the silence. But there was not a dry eye in the room, and many heads were bowed. Then the actor rose to his feet again. His voice shook as he laid his hand upon the shoulder of the old clergyman and said, "I reached your eyes and ears, my friends. He reached your hearts. The difference is just this. I know the 23rd Psalm, but he knows the shepherd." And one of the things I want to do is for us to get in the shepherd's shoes, get in Bible people's shoes so we can maybe know the shepherd better ourselves. But it's going to take some effort, and for us to be able to it's going to take some effort to do that and get rid of our 2026 bias and all of those things. But that's one of the things I want us to do. I want us to possibly, with all the things that we're going to be talking about, and you can refer to the screen. I'm not going to go over everything that's on the screen. Hopefully it's big enough in some cases. But I want to possibly will make the Bible more relevant with some of the things that I want us to talk about. I want us to know more of his or her heart in their situation that they were in those Bible times. I want us to put ourselves into the shoes of the Bible people. And part of that is trying to identify with their culture. Really understand the Jew-Gentile friction. And that's really difficult for us. You know, we can kind of relate a little bit today to some of the anti-Semitic stuff that we see, but do we truly experience it the way that they did in the 1st century and in 7th century BC and so on? Captivity periods, freedom periods, ruled over, when they're ruled over. Especially in the New Testament, they're ruled over. In the Old Testament, in 2 or 3 different cases, they're in captivity and in another place. How do we really identify with that and understand what they were going through? Patriarchal age. Have we ever really lived in a patriarchal age? I don't think so. We have close families and everything else, but it's not the same way when that was your country, when that was your religion, your life and everything. The Mosaic period, I'm glad we don't have to identify with that. One of the things that was mentioned 2 weeks ago, when I said I'd really like to put ourselves in the shoes of those Old Testament or New Testament people. And Paul Tolliver said, "For how long?" And I think that's a really good point. We can do that, but can we really get in there because we don't want to? I like where we live now. I like where I live. I like the time that we live, and so on. But so be able to do that and identify in some way. When we're talking about the Christian dispensation, yes, after Acts 2, we're talking about the Christian dispensation. But it's not the Christian dispensation that we're used to in 2026. That is totally different when the church is totally new. And it's just a whole other time. 6 different references here that I want to talk about in trying to really imagine and try to make the Bible more relevant. In 1 Chronicles 12:32, it talks about the men of Issachar, and the chronicler is talking about the people who are assisting David and so on. But he says that the men of Issachar who understood the times with knowledge of what Israel should do. Sounds like the good people we would need to be around, right? So how did they know the times? How did they understand them? Okay, for us, that's going to be know the Scripture, understand and discern the application of the moment. And I really like the word discern because it's a code word for judge. We have to judge a lot of things in life. And that's not in the sense of Matthew 7:1 when it says, judge not that you know, when Jesus is talking in the Sermon on the Mount. We have to judge things in our lives. We have to discern. And those men of Issachar understood the times with knowledge of what Israel should do. Ezra, when he got back to Jerusalem, Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord and to do it, to teach his statutes and rules in Israel. He had a deep understanding, not a surface familiarity. How much of our knowledge of the Bible is surface familiarity? And I think regardless of our age, whether it's way down there that I was over 50 years ago, congratulations, or where we are today, we need to move beyond surface familiarity, and we need to have a deeper understanding. And what happened in Ezra's life, there was an order in that case. Study, practice, then teach. And I think in a lot of cases you can reverse 2 and 3, teach and then practice. Put it out there, do some things, learn from them. But always go back to the Bible principles. Always go back to the Bible principles. And I held it down too long. Nehemiah 8:8. And you go back 2 verses, and one of my favorite verses in the Old Testament. When they opened the book, this is the book of law, their scriptures at the time. When they opened the book, all the people stood. I really like that. That's the respect for the Word of God that we need to have. But 2 verses later, they read from the book, from the law of God clearly, and they gave the sense. I really like that language. So that the people understood the reading. They didn't change the reading. All they did was give it in a deeper way because they knew the Lord. They knew the shepherd before the shepherd appeared as the good shepherd. But they knew the sense and they gave it to the people so that the people understood the reading. Hebrews 4:15 is stated in the negative. I'm going to state it in the positive. We have a high priest who is able to sympathize with our weaknesses, one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Jesus put himself in our shoes. I want us to put ourselves in Bible people's shoes. Jesus did it already. And he knows and has experienced everything that we have, without exception. Jesus put himself in our shoes. The Good Samaritan, the story about the Good Samaritan, the Samaritan as he journeyed came to where he was. This is the wounded man had been assaulted and everything else. Came to where he was. What happened to the 2 people before that, the priest and the Levite? They didn't go to where he was. They passed on the other side. They didn't want to be delayed and everything else. The Samaritan came to where he was, identified with him, did what was needed to be done for that man at that time. I want us to go where they were, at least mentally, and try to really have the type of compassion and to see Bible characters so that we can, we need to come where they were, leave our identity, leave our assumptions, leave our comfort. Are we pretty comfortable? I think we're really comfortable in the United States of America. And we need to see the scene as they culturally and emotionally lived it. 1 Corinthians 10:11. Now these things happened to them as an example. Who's the example for? That's us. But they were written down for our instruction. So we get the example. They're written down for us. Did they have those things written down in the New Testament times? They had some Old Testament examples, but they didn't have the church examples written down at the start like we have. And that's one of the things I really want us to think about. We have everything. There is no mystery whatsoever that the Old Testament people wondered about, that the New Testament people wondered about. We should begin with what did this mean to them and try to identify with their limits, with their fears, with their culture. I think it would really have an impact on our lives. Before Scripture speaks to us, it first spoke to them. And we can understand it best when we listen as they once did. We'll look at 1 Peter 1. We'll look at Hebrews, where it talks about the Old Testament people longed to understand. They had no clue. The prophets, the writers of the Old Testament wrote things that I don't understand what I'm writing down, but I'm writing it down because I need to do it. I wonder what it means of what I'm writing down. That's what the Old Testament writers were talking about when they're talking about the Messiah who's going to come and how God is going to save them. And who are these people? And they're really going to include non-Jews? Think about it. It's all revealed to us. We don't have to wonder about that. But I think we should try to wonder more. We need to temporarily suspend modern assumptions. That's difficult in a lot of cases. Understand that. We need to try to feel the pressure, the risk, the fear, the honor-shame world of the first century and before. Do we have to identify with that in our everyday life? Some a little bit in our way, yes, but not in the ways of the Old Testament and the New Testament people. I referred to Hebrews 11, and we won't read those. I do want to look at 1 Peter 1 if we get to that a little bit later. But it talks about, especially in 1 Peter 1, angels long to look into these things. It's an a cappella song. I just love angels. Where are angels from? Where do they live? They're in heaven. They're with God. They longed to look into the things that the Old Testament people were writing about and experiencing. And if we're in some ways more than the angels, but in other ways way less than the angels. But if the angels longed to look into those things, we should have the same wonder. We should have the same ability and desire to be able to step out and more fully understand those things. We really, really need to wonder. We'll get to that if a little later today. These are some of the people that just flashed through my mind and we're not going to talk about them. I want us to talk about at least one group or one set of people each of the rest of the 12 Sundays in this quarter. And I mentioned this a little bit on Wednesday night and in some of the other groups and so on, but can you really identify with Mary when the angel comes to her and says, you're going to have a baby? You're not married yet, I know that, but you're going to have a baby. Can you really identify with Mary in that case, especially you women? Think about it from Joseph's standpoint. You're in love with a girl and everything else. You're going to marry her and everything else. And you find out she's pregnant. What's going through Joseph's mind? Luke tells us a little bit about what's going through Joseph's mind, but can we really get in there and understand that and appreciate? I don't think we can, but we need to try. Moses at the burning bush. There's a bush over there burning. Huh? What's going on? A little closer. I love to imagine the first time Adam saw Eve and the first time Eve saw Adam. Whoa. I think one of the translations, it says in between the lines. That's a joke when it says translation, when it says in between the lines. The word that came out of Adam's mouth was, wow. I mean, just imagine, if you're going to see the Red Sea parted, you can see the ark today. How many of you have been to south of Cincinnati and Kentucky and seen that monstrous ark? If you've been there, cool. If you haven't, go. It's neat. It's by the bigger cubit, so it's a little bit bigger if you want to use the 20 or 21-inch cubit as opposed to the 18-inch cubit. But it's almost 2 football fields long. It's pretty tall. But imagine stepping out of the ark after being on it for a year. Imagine standing at the foot of the cross, identifying with Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and using their principles if you're really got your back to the wall and challenged on your faith. Esther walking in the room knowing that she might be killed, may be the last time she ever does anything. Nicodemus going to Jesus at night. He's a member of the Sanhedrin. He's leaving, going by himself, and everything. I wonder what Jesus is going to say. I am really curious about Jesus. I hear these things. I've heard he's done these things. I'm going to talk with him. Just imagine being in Nicodemus' shoes. It's hard. I think I want us to be able to try to more fully appreciate the Bible and its examples and the characters that we read about. I want us to be able to do this, to raise awareness, to try to understand more, to think more deeply of the what-ifs and then apply them to our times and our lives and so on. But those who don't know history or don't learn from it are doomed to repeat it. Do you agree with that? I think we all have to. If you don't agree with that, you need to. I'm sure you do, mostly. We are doomed to repeat history if we don't know about it, if we don't appreciate it, and if we don't learn from it. Whose mistakes should we want to learn from the most? This is where you respond with an answer. Whose mistakes should you want to learn from the most? People in the Bible, as Sue says. The real quick answer to that is other people's mistakes. We need to learn from them. I don't want to make those mistakes myself. And if I'm just going along with my take it for granted 2026 mentality and everything else, and I say, well, whatever. I want to be able to observe and notice things, whether I'm over whatever age I am or when I was whatever long time before. I want to look around and observe and say, I don't want to do what that guy did or what she did. I'm going to learn from that. I'm not going to make that mistake. We need to learn from other people's examples. I was trying to look at another note. I'll get there. We need to get out of our comfort zone. I really think that. The second thing that I want us to talk about is providence in history. I'm really interested in this the older I get. And I don't want to take for granted the blessings, the privilege, and the honor of being able to live in the United States of America in 2026. Regardless of any other thoughts in there, and I want to apply this to the Bible, I want to apply this to what the people recognized in 1775 and saying, we're going to start something and we're going to base it on really good principles that have been different, and we've learned from the mistakes of monarchies and aristocracies and everything else. This is going to be really hard, but we're going to set something up different that's going to be better. Can you really put yourself in a 1774, 75? If you're one of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence and you're signing your death warrant, that's possibly what they were doing when they signed that sheet of paper on August the 2nd, not July the 4th, by the way. And it was approved on July the 2nd. It wasn't officially approved until the 4th. That's the dates and everything. But I want us to be able to look back, not just in retrospect, but I want us to recognize the people at the time. In whatever year, the different incidents that we're going to look at, they recognized providence at that time. That's not us in 2026 looking 250 years ago and saying, oh, that's really, I see that now. They didn't see it then of how it was really going to turn out and what they were doing, but they said, yes, I'm recognizing this is providence that's happening at the time. And I think a lot of people in this world today, and especially in this country and so on, want to wash over some of that and get rid of it. I want us to look at it more closely. It has been said that a special providence watches over children, drunkards, and the United States. That is a direct quote. It is very, very hard to attribute that to anybody in particular, but it started showing up in the mid-1800s, about 1849. A person supposedly said it in 1870. Others have looked at that. So I'm not going to try to say that one particular person and give credit to one particular person, but people have thought that. Why do they think that about my country? Why aren't there things around there that say, well, Italy is this way, or China is this way, or whatever? And their histories are a lot longer in those cases. But the United States, this is me saying, the United States is special. It is, and I want us to not overplay it, but I want us to look at it and recognize providence in history. A question, does history repeat itself? Think about it before you answer real quickly. Does history repeat itself? I have a particular answer. What do you think? Yes, sir. That's exactly the right answer, Perry. Thank you. History doesn't repeat itself. People repeat history. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen. So what do we need to do? We need to learn from it. We need to know it. We need to study it. We need to look at it. The people like Ezra and Nehemiah that we've already talked about, the men of Issachar, that knew the times and understood history. How do we recognize the providence of God? I don't have the answer to that. I want to look more closely this time. But how do we really recognize it? And how much is God really doing? Now, I'll talk about that a little bit later. We will have, since I'm getting to decide, we'll have lessons from Mount St. Helens. I just throw that out there don't miss that Sunday. I hiked there this last summer, and there's a lot of things that went on that day. I want us to fully appreciate our life in the U.S., and these are other imagine or choose experiences. And I've said it, I'm really glad I live where I live. How do we guarantee our blessed life in the United States? I grew up in Abilene, Texas, right across the street from ACC. It will always be that to me. It is ACU, but it's ACC. Right across the street from ACC, right across the street from the College Church of Christ. George Bailey was our minister at that time. And he preached a sermon on that particular day. Now, I've got to do some other research, and I am assisted by, I call my assistant Eunice. And there's a story to that. I'm using AI as a tool, but I've got Eunice kind of trained, and she's not spouting off to me some things that are just accepted by others, but I want her to push on me a little bit as well. So we're kind of learning. I am convinced that I heard Brother Bailey preach that sermon before April in the College Church building, but that's not important. But I want us to look at a lot of things in a structured way like he did at that time. Will God always bless America? Was the name of his sermon. That was 1963. And yes, I was alive, and it was not in single digits at that time. Those questions. Is there any other country that you would say is more blessed than the U.S.? Would you want to live in any other country? Do you wish you had been born in any other country? All of those are no for me. I want to appreciate and more deeply understand how we got to this point, how we can maybe return more to the principles that the founding fathers and mothers had in establishing the United States of America and base it on the Bible. Five scriptures here. In Daniel 2 and in Daniel 4, Daniel is talking to whom or talking about whom? Daniel 2 and Daniel 4. Who's he talking to and about? Da, 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 da. He's talking to Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar's had this dreams, and Daniel is saying, and he's talking to himself in verse 21. He's really gone back with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and he's talking with them and everything else. But he said, God changes times and seasons. He removes and sets up kings. We can look back and see points in time where God has done that. That's in retrospect. How much God does that today and whether we can make specific applications in our time and over the last 2,600 years or so, I think that's dangerous if we say that God did that, but I do not want to limit God because he certainly can and he certainly could have had. Maybe he made sure that Hitler was in rule for less than 15 years. Did God ordain Hitler in there? Certainly not. He allowed it, but maybe he made sure that it ended in 45. I don't want to limit God, but God does rule. And as Daniel talks about there, he changes times and seasons, he removes and sets up kings. Paul is talking in Acts 17, and he's talking about the history of Israel, the history of the Jews. And yes, God did determine boundaries. They could look back and see that in prior Jewish history. I think God can and still does that. Psalm 33, and all of those 10 verses there in that case. The only thing I put on the screen, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. How do we make that more true in the United States of America today? What's our part in that? And whether that's just in our individual faith or what we can do to make sure that this is the Lord's nation. I think that's something we need to think about. Proverbs 14, Solomon says, righteousness exalts a nation, sin is a reproach. How do we get to the point in our life today where we can make sure that sin is still sin? It's becoming a harder question. And an application in that case, when Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, you're the salt of the earth. If the salt has lost its savor or its taste, throw it out. You're the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel. Where do they put it? On a candlestick that can be seen throughout the house. Let your light so shine before men. Do we do that? And I want us to look a little more closely at how, as Brother Bailey was talking about in 1963, will God always bless America, and how can we try? Well, I won't say particular president. One of the presidents in the past was talking about the country being a light in the world and everything. We need to try to make application and grow the relevance in our lives so that we're stronger. The third thing I want to talk about is what I'm just referring to as the hard Jesus. I listened to one guy who was talking about some of this, and he said, his Jesus, and my Jesus too, is, how did he say it? His Jesus is not the sissified, needy Jesus. And I really like that. Jesus was tough. He wanted people to follow him for the principles that he had, not because he did miracles, not because he was a cool teacher. He did do miracles. He was a really cool teacher, and all the people recognized that. Because at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew 7:28, they were amazed at his teaching. Why? Because he taught them as having authority, and not as their scribes did. But Jesus wants us to follow him for the high expectations that he had for his followers, and that is in their works. And I want us to get to the point where we're not running away from the word works. The religious world wants us to run from that. They don't want to talk about it, do they? But we are created for good works, as Paul says in Ephesians and so on. But Jesus has the highest expectations for his followers in our choices, in their choices of the people that we will look at, in principles. He wants excellence. And I was talking with our superintendent in school a few months ago and so on. And she was saying that, well, it depends on your definition of excellence. And she was saying that as what other people say. My definition of excellence is pretty high, and I want to apply that to me. I don't want to have it compared to something else. And that's the other thing. People bring up things, other people do it. Well, if you want to compare, that's okay. Well, it's not really. But if you want to compare to other people and water down your standards, that's your choice. But Jesus expects more. He expects our discretion, and we need to evaluate ourselves and others. And that's required in our efforts toward excellence. Are there different ways to excellence? Sure. There are all sorts of different ways. And we can improve in different ways, whether it's knowledge, whether it's experience, and some of the things that we'll glance at real quick. Is God disappointed or displeased if we don't strive to be excellent? And I would say absolutely he is. We should be too. One person told me one time, we were talking about classes in Bible class, and that person said, well, this isn't school. And I wanted to stand up and scream, honestly, as if, well, we get a grade in school, and we have to come prepared, and we have to please the teacher. Are we getting a grade right now? Do we have to please God? Do we want to go to heaven? Are the standards for us outside of school to be a whole lot higher than just as if we were in? We graduated from school. Everyone, right? You're. I don't know how old you are. I just know you're the youngest. We're out of school. We should be a whole lot smarter because we graduated, right? We should have a whole lot higher standards. Yes, this isn't school, so be better every day. And that's what we ought to do. We need to have the courage to be disliked, and we need to have the courage to be excellent. The world tries to drag us down. The world wants to compare us to them. You're trying too hard. You get it at work. I used to see it at work. And so on. You're working too hard. The boss is going to expect me to do more. Yeah, you're making me look bad, as Kelly said. We need to not water things down. And we need to not have different reasons or excuses for not being excellent. We do need to stick out. We do need to be different. We need to, as the King James talks about, we need to be peculiar people. Do we stick out enough today and at the times? And are we really authentic followers of Christ? We'll look at particular places, with the hard things that Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, the difficult sayings that he has. He came to cause the division. He said, you have ears, use them. O ye of little faith. He said more than once. If somebody told you that directly in the first century, how would you feel? The questions that he asked. When he says, woe to you who? I don't want to be the you in that case. If Jesus said that, he says, have you not read? It's kind of like the teacher. I think, a particular teacher another time. Have you not read that? You were supposed to. You were bad. You had that assignment. You're supposed to know this. And I want us to look at things that have slipped over the times and the centuries. And we can all point to those just in our lifetime the things and the principles and the standards that have slipped? And how do we really have an impact on that? Ephesians 2 is where it talks about we're created for good works. Galatians 2 says, it's not, I was crucified. It's not I who live, but Christ lives in me. We live by faith. We live by the faith of Jesus first and foremost. If his faith was not what it was, our faith could be really, really, really strong and it would be useless. That's one of the worst sounds in history. Our faith is useless if it's not based on Jesus' faith. We're saved by his faith. We're not saved by our faith. When you really look at that, we are saved by his faith, not ours. And that's what Ephesians talks about. It's not your work. So it's not our faith that saves us. It must be based on. So we need to increase our faith in that. I'm going to fly here. But those are ways that we can increase our faith. There's all sorts of ways. Knowledge, experience, trials that we have. Are we going to face trials? James says yes. So we need to be ready for those. I want to point out where I'm going to go with this class. The experience that we have, we need to look back at the providence of God in the past. The examples and observations, can we imagine that we're looking and experiencing those examples and observations? Everything needs to be based on the Bible. Bible, number 1. Bible, number 2. Bible, number 5 and 6, and so on and there. Do we need to have more fear in our lives? It's not a trick question. We need to have more fear in our lives and have that as respect toward God. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. That's not a crippling fear, that's a respectful fear. And we need to have a little more godly fear in our lives. Providence, examples and observations, Bible principles. That's what we're going to be talking about. Imagine ourselves in all of those situations in the Bible. Look at providence in history and look at the hard Jesus. I talked about the angels and the prophets. They wrote those things down. They inquired. They searched. They wanted to know and understand what they were writing about. They wondered how all of this was really going to happen. For us, it's revealed. We don't have to wonder, but I'm saying we should wonder in such a sense that, wow, this really did, God's plan is amazing, but we really need to have a closer understanding. It's been gifted to us. Did you get gifts at Christmas? Yeah. Did you open them? Dumb question, right? Okay, let's open the gift that we've been given and really appreciate it. Really, don't just take it for granted. And we do that in the United States. We should inquire of the past and not just accept what has been gifted to us. We don't appreciate things as much as we should. I do believe that. We cause or allow our faith by our own personal responsibility. This stuff of ask Jesus into your heart, he's already there. You have to accept it and really make him work in that case. That's my 1-minute warning, and I'll turn off my phone in just a second. But we'll take the ropes down, but I appreciate that. Oh, hush. But I wanted to make sure. The longing of the prophets and the angels, do we long to appreciate and do we long to grow with the same type of wonder that they had? I want us to back up and really search for that. Their experiences are recorded for us to grasp the gift and move our faith to confirmed conviction. If we can use that to grow and really have an appreciation for what we have in 2026, that's what I want us to be able to try to do. Thank you.